I grew up in a almost Puritan household. You may think you did too, but I grew up in a house where happiness was always suspect, and devil's food cake was called white cake, and deviled eggs were called dressed eggs. I wish I was kidding. I'm not. I mean, we were that strict. But even Puritans have to go to the grocery store. And so when my mother took me and my brother Billy by Houchins on the way home from school, I was exposed to salacious gossip in the checkout lane. I don't know that anyone in Glasgow, Kentucky actually had what could be called an inquiring mind, but as soon as I could read, I was reading the headlines out loud, asking my mother, "Is that true?" Now, my mother didn't have a day of education in her background, and she was not at all above going in for a deep dive in gossip in the beauty shop when my brother and I had to wait for an hour every 2 weeks when she got a temporary put in her hair. But when I would read those headlines out loud and say, Mama, did aliens really probe those people? Say, Roger Lee, just go wait in the car. But the tabloids evolved into being less about movie stars or the Kennedys or space aliens, and the editors took a decidedly right-wing perspective and published outrageous lies about the political left, but particularly opponents of Donald Trump. Now, you would think that when people had seen headlines standing in the grocery store about Obama being gay, or Oprah having only months to live, or Bill Clinton hiring an intern who had 3 breasts. And I'm not making any of that up. That was all frontline stuff. You would think that even the most jaded of right-wing nuts would realize that this is not a source of information. I think, though, that they went too far when they claimed that Ted Cruz was having affairs with 5 women. That's just crazy. There are not 5 women on earth that are that desperate. It just is not true. But you know who does take the gossip rag seriously? And it's humiliating to have to say this, but President Donald Trump not only said that they were a reliable source of news, but he even suggested that the Inquirer be nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. That would make Charles Darwin blush that evolution just hasn't happened. But now facts are coming out that the Inquirer was in the habit of buying and killing stories about Donald Trump. They literally have a safe full of stories, and some of them are about marriage infidelities, but possibly others are about connections to the Russian government or to organized crime. All this while Trump calls mainstream news sources such as the New York Times or CNN fake news. Now, the advent of the internet and all of the related social media platforms it has spawned has done some good things for the universe of journalism, but it's also done some bad things. On the one hand, the internet is unfiltered, preventing corporate media from censoring our news feed because they do sometimes tend to feed the public only what they want the public to know. But on the other hand, the internet is unfiltered, like a giant digital Inquirer, allowing all manner of conspiracy theories, foreign propaganda, and lunacy to appear in Google searches as if they were the same as legitimate journalism. Sometimes difficult to know what source you could or should trust and what you shouldn't. 15 years ago, when I was lecturing at the day school at Drury University in the religion department, if a student handed in a paper and quoted WikiLeaks or Wikipedia as a source, I would give them the paper back and give them a chance to do it again. Now, all my students appeared to lose the ability to go to the library all at once. I mean, you used to, in the old days, you could put papers on reserve in the library that you weren't going to make them buy all those books. They could go read in the library. And even though the library was right outside the building where I lectured, they didn't appear to know where the front door was. We no longer have a Walter Cronkite on TV news, and we don't have a thoroughly trustworthy and vetted Encyclopedia Britannica back in the reference room of the library. But while 15 years ago, if a student cited Wikipedia as a source, I made them rewrite the paper. But now Wikipedia has changed. It's become a much more reliable source of information, largely because they recruited a lot of volunteer academic editors, and I'm one of them, that we can go in and change articles to make them more correct, and there's literally a process of getting rid of some of the bad information and some of the propaganda. And Facebook and Twitter are having to go through that process now. They're having to realize that they can't just let themselves be a bulletin board in which people put everything up. You've got to be able to filter out foreign propaganda, lunatic conspiracy theories, and thankfully hate mongers. There's, not to give you all too much of a peek under the hood, but this is a sermon I wrote on Tuesday, and so much has happened since Tuesday, I felt like I needed to do some major rewrites. But there's been a lot of stuff going on in terms of media evolution. The internet and the 24-hour news stations have changed the way that we get news. As recently as 10 years ago, I had almost no anonymity in this city because most people read the newspaper, and people out on the sidewalks in town would recognize me from my picture in the paper. I could count on, what did we say in those days, Don? 40, 50,000 people were regularly reading the newspaper at that time.
Sunday, 100,000.
100,000. And now I run into people regularly. I get recognized at places like Crosslines and stuff. And people will tell me, I used to love to read your columns when you were in the News Leader. And I say, I'm still in the News Leader. And they say, you are? Because not very many people read the paper anymore. More people read my column from my Facebook page than read it in the city newspaper. And it's a city newspaper that's supposed to serve this region that may have 500,000 people in it. But print journalism fell off a cliff a decade ago, and people get their news from other sources now. We've always called the media the fourth estate, and what that means is that they are not the news, not supposed to be the news, but they are also not elected officials. They're supposed to be a fourth estate that is a disinterested party that can just tell the truth about what's going on. Some very clever people came up with the title The Fifth Estate for their 2013 movie about the explosion of the influence of WikiLeaks. Frankly, I think I know everything about Julian Assange that I really care to know about him, but I cannot resist a Benedict Cumberbatch movie. It's like cat to a catnip. I just have to watch. But the idea is an appealing idea. The corporate media was supposed to be disinterested, but they're owned by for-profit corporations. They sell ads, they sell subscriptions, so they're not entirely disinterested. They can't be entirely disinterested in what the readers want to read and what their corporate sponsors want them to print. So a fifth estate allows us to have a different kind of watchdog on the government and corporations. But both TV and print media now rely too much on access to the government. There are big parties and stuff where both the people they're covering and the people covering them get together and they have drinks and fraternize, and there's a little too much chummy stuff for us to get from the print media everything that we wanted from them. But the Fifth Estate is not like the Fourth Estate. They don't have corporate sponsors, but they also don't have editors or anything that smacks of journalistic ethics. I'll tell you, over my 25 years of writing for the paper, I've probably had 25 editors. I wear them out pretty quickly, but Don held my feet to the fire more than all the rest of them added together, which is part of why I wanted you here today, that Don would send an article back and say, can you substantiate this and this and this and this? And oftentimes it was just my opinion. I just so happened to be right. I'm an opinion writer, right? So I could, how wrong can you be? It's my opinion. But we did have to put a bunch of footnotes in to make Don happy. The Obama administration tried to mess with Julian Assange on a personal level, and Assange had to go into hiding in the Ecuadorian embassy in London, and he has been there like a prisoner for years now. But from his prison, he struck back against an insufficiently guarded nation. So Assange has done bad things, though I think I can understand why. If you insist on drawing mustaches on dangerous dogs, you should anticipate being bitten. But Assange exposed some bad things that our government was doing, and our government tried to trump up fake criminal charges against him, which sent him into hiding, and he got revenge by hurting the entire world by helping Donald Trump to be elected. So the Fifth Estate will not ever be easy for us to control, so we're going to get some blessings from them, and we're going to get some curses from them for the foreseeable future. The world is changing. I miss the days when newspapers were ubiquitous, and you could fairly well count on most of the people you knew had read the same articles that you had read. You could literally drop by a coffee shop and strike up a conversation with someone who had just read the same thing you had read. You had a shared information base, and we've never been able to replace that people would read the front page and then turn to the opinion page. And I just noticed today they're cutting the opinion page down from 6 pages a week to 4, in which case, why do people read the paper? Because it's those opinion columns that really sort of run the world, isn't it? But whether it's the newspapers or television news or podcasts or the internet, we cannot do without access to free and unbiased news reporting, and we have to hold ourselves to a standard of staying informed. When our nation was in its first decade, Thomas Jefferson wrote to a friend that if he had to choose between a nation that had a government but no newspapers, or a nation that had newspapers and no government, that he would not hesitate to choose the latter. Because newspapers are that important. But he added that people had to read them. Jefferson regularly shocked his readers with his comments about how to curb government abuses. He helped to create the government, and he was one of our first presidents. But he knew that governments can only be kept honest if the population remains informed. As soon as citizens refuse to read, to be informed, and to question their government, they are literally holding the door open to government corruption. It is journalism's check against corruption that makes our current president hate the media so much. And you'll notice he almost never mentions the church, because the church almost never mentions him. Dictators and tyrants always hate the media, labeling the media as the enemy of the people. That's a phrase we're hearing out of our White House now, but it's a phrase that we've heard throughout history from some of the most vicious thugs we have ever known of. Robespierre, Goebbels, Lenin, Stalin, Mao, they all called the media the enemy of the people. And as NPR's Scott Simon observed this week, and when they do that, many of those journalists end up being murdered. In the middle of last month, many news agencies, taking the lead from the Boston Globe, tried to fight back against Trump's constant reference to the media as fake news and his now much more serious, libelous charge that the media is the enemy of the people. This is a guy who now averages more than 6 lies per day in his tweets and statements. He watches Fox News and declares that the Inquirer deserves a Pulitzer, and he calls the New York Times and CNN fake news, all of which would be laughable if everybody was laughing. The problem is that there is a huge portion of our public that is so gullible that they actually fall in line. Hate mongers on the radio have for 20 years been referring to the liberal media, and you see bumper stickers, you know, on people's cars that say, "I don't believe the liberal media." Folks, other than podcasts, there is no such thing as a liberal media. TV news, newspapers are owned by for-profit corporations. They are, therefore, by their nature, very conservative. Honestly, it seems to me that conservatives seem to think that facts are not just inconvenient, but that facts are inherently liberal, that information is opposed to their worldview. They remind me a lot of that Lily Tomlin one-woman play, The Search for Intelligent Life in the Universe, in which Tomlin portrays a schizophrenic homeless woman who believes that she's talking to space aliens, and she's trying to explain to them the difference between soup and art, a can of Campbell's soup or an Andy Warhol painting of a can of tomato soup. This is soup, this is art. Soup is not art, art is not soup. I keep trying to tell people, this is news, and this is uninformed hysteria. Like you were surprised to hear me say that. This one helps you to make good decisions. This one turns you into the crazy uncle that no one wants to sit beside at Thanksgiving. This is the Fourth Estate. This is the Twilight Zone. This is critical thinking, and this is where zombies eat your brains. The founders of our nation were all rebels, and they were nonconformists. It took them 11 years to write the Constitution. And even then, only 11 of the 13 colonies were willing to ratify it. So 2 years later, after they'd written the Constitution and couldn't get more than 11 to sign on, they drafted 12 amendments, a Bill of Rights, in order to assuage the fears and doubts of the residents of Rhode Island and North Carolina. It was the Bill of Rights that united the 13 colonies into the first iteration of the United States of America. The first of those amendments offers indisputable protection to the rights of freedom of religion, an individual's freedom of speech, a free press, and the right to assemble to protest the government. The church and the news media were the only two institutions named in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights as being specifically protected from government interference. You often hear people say that journalism was the only business protected in the Constitution, but the church as an institution, not as a business, these two voices were considered to be so crucial to the maintenance of a democracy that the First Amendment protected us both from government interference. We have been protected so that we will inform the public, that we will teach the public in the skills of moral deliberation and how to receive information and process it. Profit-driven news media gave Donald Trump disproportional attention in 2016. Counterspin estimated that Donald Trump got 80 times as much news coverage during the primaries as, what was the guy's name with the funny hair? Bernie Sanders. 80 times as much. But they were giving him that attention because he was comical, because he was shocking, because he was controversial, and that drove viewers and readers. Churches with educated progressive clergy were nearly silent out of fear of alienating potential donations. When the media and the church simultaneously fail to do what they were given constitutional protections to do, then you end up with a tyrant. So I have a modest proposal that you get up, stand up for your rights. Get up, stand up. Don't let them take your rights away from you. Amen.
Thank you for watching our videos. We are entirely dependent on the donations of our listeners and members. We hope that you find this content to be important enough to help us to keep offering these videos to the public at no charge by becoming a regular contributor. Please click on the donate button on our website at www.spfccc.org. Thank you for your support of progressive religious programming.